The little bell above the door rang as she stepped into the gun store, the weight of every eye in the room settling on her. She wasn't dressed in combat boots or a tactical jacket, but in a simple shirt and worn-out jeans. To most people there, she didn't look like someone who belonged in a place full of polished rifles and heavy pistols lined neatly on the walls. A few men standing by the counter exchanged smirks, their voices dropping into low chuckles that weren't hard to catch. One of them whispered just loud enough, questioning if she even knew the difference between a safety lock and a trigger. The laughter grew, soft but sharp enough to sting, filling the air with a quiet kind of mockery. She ignored them at first, her focus steady as she looked at the display in front of her. Her hands weren't trembling, and her eyes didn't waver. There was something about the calm way she carried herself that didn't quite match the picture they had painted of her. Still, the mocking words continued, circling her like shadows. One man even joked that maybe she came in looking for a toy gun, and the room erupted again in a small wave of snide laughter. But what no one there knew was that her story was nothing like the assumptions they were making. She had walked battlefields that these men had only seen in movies. She had endured nights when silence was broken by the crack of gunfire. And she had faced choices that demanded not just strength, but courage of a different kind. Every scar she carried, visible or not, was tied to moments these men could not imagine. And just as the room seemed to settle into its rhythm of ridicule, the front door swung open again. A man in uniform walked in his presence, commanding silence before he even spoke. His eyes scanned the room, landed on her, and in a moment that froze every smirk in place, he straightened his posture, lifted his hand to his forehead, and gave her a sharp, respectful salute. The store fell into complete silence, and everyone waited to understand who she really was. The salute hung in the air like a question no one dared to ask. The men who had been laughing just moments ago shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between her and the commander who stood so firmly. At the door, his uniform wasn't something you could mistake. It carried the weight of authority, respect, and years of service. Yet his gesture wasn't casual. It wasn't for show. It was the kind of salute given only to someone who had earned it. Through sacrifice and honor, she didn't return the salute right away. Instead, she kept her gaze steady, almost as if she had been expecting this moment. The silence in the store grew heavier, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. The men who had mocked her now felt a quiet unease settle in, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. One of them cleared his throat, trying to break the tension, muttering something about not understanding what was going on. The commander took a step closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. His voice was low but firm when he finally spoke. "You don't know who you're standing next to, do you?" The question wasn't directed at her, but at the room itself. Still, he offered no explanation, leaving the weight of his words to sink in. Her past wasn't written on her face, and that was what made her so hard to read. She had lived years carrying stories no one in that room could guess, stories of discipline, of endurance, of moments when hesitation meant everything. To her, this was just another room filled with doubters, another test of patience. But to them, it was a mystery unfolding, one they hadn't expected when she first walked in. And just as the silence stretched too far, she finally opened her mouth to speak. The first words she chose would change everything they thought they knew. Her voice was calm when it finally broke the silence, though it carried the kind of weight that demanded attention. She didn't raise it, didn't snap back at the men who had mocked her. She didn't need to. "Some of you think you know what strength looks like," she said softly, her eyes steady, but strength isn't loud. It isn't a joke told at someone else's expense. The words seemed to settle into the air, and for the first time, no one had a quick response. The commander stayed quiet, letting her words carry their own power. He didn't interrupt, and he didn't explain. Instead, he stood like a guard of honor, as though he knew this moment belonged entirely to her. The men around the counter exchanged glances, their confidence faltering. Something about the way she spoke, measured, assured, almost practiced, hinted at experience they could never match. She reached out to the display case, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of a pistol. Her touch wasn't hesitant, but it wasn't careless either. She handled the space with a respect that revealed more than any uniform or badge could. It was the kind of respect learned through years of discipline, the kind of understanding that comes from treating every weapon as more than steel and fire. The room remained thick with unanswered questions. Who was she? Really? Why would a commander walk into a small-town gun store and salute her as though she carried a rank higher than his? The silence wasn't only about shock, now was about curiosity. A gnawing curiosity that pressed on everyone present. And then she glanced back at the men who had laughed at her. A faint, almost unreadable smile on her lips. "You wanted to know what I'm doing here," she said slowly. "The truth is, you're not ready for that answer." The room seemed to shrink after her words, as if the walls themselves leaned closer, waiting for what might come next. The men who had smirked minutes ago now stood stiff, their laughter gone, replaced by an unease they couldn't quite hide. The commander's salute still echoed in their minds, a silent reminder that something about this woman was far greater than they had imagined. But no one dared ask again. She stepped forward, her boots pressing against the wooden floor with a quiet certainty. Every movement felt deliberate, as though she had walked into far tenser rooms than this one and left unshaken. Her eyes moved across the shelves, then back to the faces around her, almost as if she was measuring them, testing whether they could hold their own under pressure. The tension rose with every second of silence. The commander finally broke it, his voice sharper now. "You're standing in front of someone who's earned respect in places most of you wouldn't survive a day." His words didn't sound like flattery, they sounded like fact. Still, he didn't say her name, and he didn't tell her story. That mystery hung in the air, feeding the suspense. One of the men shifted uneasily and tried to laugh it off, but the sound was thin, nervous. "All right," he muttered. "So what is she then? Military? Law enforcement? Some kind of commander? Herself?" The guesses tumbled out, but none of them carried any weight compared to the intensity of her presence. She turned slowly, her gaze locking on the man who had spoken. The faint smile she gave wasn't one of friendliness, it was the kind of smile that carried warning. The kind that told a person they were close to discovering something they weren't prepared to handle. The air grew heavier, every breath tighter, as though the entire store balanced on the edge of what she might reveal next. And in that fragile silence, it became clear whatever truth she carried, it was going to change everything. The room was already heavy with tension when the second twist arrived, unexpected and sharp. Just as she locked eyes with the man who had questioned her, the door swung open again, this time not with the quiet command of the first entrance, but with urgency. Two more figures stepped inside, both in uniform, their badges gleaming under the harsh store lights. They weren't here to browse, and their expressions left no doubt. "Ma'am?" one of them said firmly, nodding in her direction. "We need you to come with us, right now." The commander stiffened, his hand instinctively brushing against the brim of his cap. His face darkened, though he said nothing. The men at the counter froze, caught between curiosity and fear. The laughter that had once filled the shop now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the unnerving weight of something far larger than they had expected. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask why. Instead, she straightened, as though she had been waiting for this call. Her calmness was more unsettling than any outburst could have been. To the strangers in the room, It raised more questions than answers. Who was she that soldiers and officers alike would step in with such urgency? Why would a commander salute her, only for others to arrive demanding her presence? The men who had mocked her earlier suddenly found themselves questioning everything. The ordinary woman they had ridiculed was clearly anything but ordinary. Still, none of them could piece the story together. Was she a leader called back into service? Was she connected to something classified, something far beyond their understanding? The silence pressed harder, broken only by the hum of the lights. Above, she turned back to the room one last time, her eyes steady, her voice low. "You wanted answers," she said, her tone carrying an edge that sent a chill through the room. "Be careful, may not be ready for the truth that's about to surface." Every gaze in the room locked on her as the two officers waited for her response. The commander, still standing tall, finally spoke, his voice carrying both pride and warning. "If she leaves with you, at least let these men understand who they were mocking." His words cut through the silence, and for the first time, the mocking faces from earlier looked down, uneasy under the weight of their mistake. She exhaled slowly, as if deciding how much of her story the room deserved to hear.